Good afternoon, doctor. How are you?
Hi. Well, thanks. How are you?
Good. Did you have a good lunch?
Thanks. Yeah, I did.
Who'd you go to lunch with?
Myself.
Did you talk to defense counsel during the break?
I did.
Did y'all talk about your testimony?
Say again?
Did you talk to defense counsel?
During lunch?
Uh-huh.
Yes.
Did y'all talk about your testimony, what you were saying, what you're going to say?
A little bit, yeah.
What did y'all talk about?
Talked about in the course of my career as a forensic psychologist, these not guilty by reason of insanity trials I refer to, or we psychologists refer to as mental status at the time of the offense cases. And I was talking about how I'm not supposed to talk about my opinion on
That's right. There's a rule of
mental
evidence
status
says you can't talk about it, so not asking about that.
Right, I know. But I was talking about how that rule of evidence wasn't always the case. So I need to...
You have to change styles a little bit, right?
Yes, yes. Because I'm so used to just talking about that. And so now I'm trying to choose my words and not,
That's true. I'm sorry, you did go to lunch with them or you didn't?
No, I got lunch on my own, and then I talked to them after I ate.
Well, doctor, what I'd like to do is, you have a long conversation with Ms. Trethewey and Mr. Kessler, and just for the record, these are exceptional attorneys. They're also nice people, right?
I think so,
yes?
yeah.
I mean, they're not mean to you or anything like that, are they?
No.
I mean, they're reasonable,
They're
right?
professionals. Yeah.
Absolutely. So what I'd like to do is I'd like to reason with you and talk through some of the things that you didn't say or didn't highlight when it came to the evaluation of the defendant. You think that's fair?
Sure.
Will you agree with me that when you're in a courtroom setting, that there are sides?
Yes.
You agree that I'm biased?
Well, you have a job to do as an attorney.
Right, I'm an advocate, right?
Yeah.
So I represent a side, right?
Yeah.
I mean, you can understand that if I can get after it or ask questions, they're designed because Hannah, the victim in the case, is kind of who I represent in many ways. You understand that's just kind of normal, right?
Yes, it is, yeah. Courtroom process is adversarial, but experts don't have sides. We're not advocates. Like, what I advocate for is my
Doctor,
opinion.
there's not a question in front of you for that. It wasn't a question from her. She's just getting a narrative.
All right, rephrase.
Doctor, my question is, yes or no, you understand that there are sides to this, right?
Yes.
Okay. And I know you want to give explanations, that's fair, and the defense can redirect you. My questions are really designed, so if I ask a question, and just try to stay within that. Is that okay?
As long as I feel like I can honestly answer the question with a yes or no.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And you agree that the defense, they have a side, is that right?
Correct.
And they represent the defendant in this case, right?
Yes.
And you agree that the court is neutral in the sense that the chief judge controls the courtroom, right?
Yes.
And you agree that the jury is separate from all of us, and they are supposed to be objective and just base their decision on the facts and the evidence. Is that right?
I believe that is correct, yes.
And you agree with me that when we have witnesses, oftentimes those witnesses are kind of entitled the state's witness, right?
I'm sorry, say it again.
The state can have witnesses, and they're
Oh.
usually kind of entitled or named state's witnesses, correct?
Yes.
And the defense can have witnesses, and they're entitled or named defense witnesses,
Yes.
right? And sometimes you can have experts that are third-party neutral. They're not the state's witness, they're not the defense witness, they're kind of more of neutral, staying out. The court may say, I'm going to get a third-party witness, expert to come in and testify. So there's party witnesses, and then there's kind of more of the neutral, objective witnesses, right?
Well, yes, although, again, I feel like it's misrepresenting witnesses as advocates. Like, if an expert witness is hired by one side or the other, you're representing as if that would change their opinion. Okay. And that's not how we operate.
But you agree you're being paid through the defense, right?
Well, although I'm being paid through the defense, I'm being paid for my time, not for my opinion. And if my opinion had been something that benefited you all, then I'd probably be paid for my time by you. So.
I'm sorry. My question is, you're being paid by the defense, yes or no?
Yes, this is my job.
I think I want to go back and start by talking about some of your background. Have you heard the term or the concept worldview?
Of course.
Of course. A worldview is a view that people kind of hold through their education, their upbringing, their life experiences, how they view the world, right?
Yes.
Is that yes?
Yes.
And another way to say it, whether it's in psychology, philosophy, or the law, sometimes we talk about that they have presuppositions, right?
Yes.
And you agree with me that oftentimes, whether it's in a courtroom or in a clinical session, it's important to know the person's worldview or presuppositions, or just kind of how they view the world, right?
I don't know, because I haven't really noticed people's worldviews being talked about in court.
But their culture is important, right?
I mean, our cultures are important, but again, I haven't really heard them talked about in court.
And in psychology, culture is something that you have to pay attention to or know something about, correct?
Yes,
And I know you live in North Carolina now,
I do.
and do you practice there in North Carolina?
I do.
And where are you from originally?
I was born and raised in Los Angeles.
And where did you graduate from high school? In Los Angeles?
Yes.
And after you graduated from high school, I think you would consider yourself a creative person.
Yes,
Are you familiar with Myers-Briggs
I am.
personality types and things
Yeah.
like that? And do you know what type of personality you are?
I do, although I have to say the Myers-Briggs is not like a standardized psychological
I'm not
test.
asking that, I'm
It's
just
pop
asking.
psychology.
Are you familiar with it?
Yeah,
Okay, what type are you?
INFJ.
Okay, and let's say someone can be intuitive, is that right?
I think I is introverted.
Right, intuitive's down the road a little bit, right?
I don't.
Feelings,
I don't remember what they
intuitive, things
stand
like that.
for. I took it like 30 years ago.
Sure,
Yeah.
but some people are more of a feeler, is that correct? Generally speaking, I'm not saying
yeah.
psychologically speaking.
Yeah.
Some people are more of a thinker, right?
Yeah. I believe I was like, actually, I'm both.
Right, so an engineer may be a thinker, just like systems and things like that, right?
Yeah.
Someone that's in sociology, psychology, oftentimes people go into those type of work because they feel for people or they have the concern or compassion. Is that true?
That can be someone's motivation.
Now, according to the website ballardphd.com, your superpower is thrifting. Is that right?
That's a website that doesn't have anything to do with my therapy practice or my forensic practice. Yeah, I love to thrift shop.
Okay, my question, doctor, was according to that website, your superpower is thrifting, correct?
Yes.
And also according to that website, you're addicted to coffee and salad. Is that right?
Yes, I just had a salad for lunch.
And also your creative obsession is surface pattern design, right?
Yes.
And you, when asked to choose between the forest or the woods and the beach, you prefer the forest, correct?
Yes.
Even though you grew up close to the beach, is that right?
Yes. Does that make this
And
matter?
then on sessionsync.com, you listed that you were a drummer in a post-punk band. Is that right?
I don't know what session sync is, but I was a drummer in several post-punk bands.
A cellist at one point,
Still am.
and floral designer at another point.
Did the weddings for both my stepdaughters.
You were a painter,
I still paint.
knitter,
Still knit.
jewelry maker,
Yeah, on and off.
mixed media art.
Still do that.
And you do have an online presence to some degree, don't you?
A little bit.
You have a little bit of tech savvy.
Well, I hire someone for that.
Now, in your undergraduate degree in studies, you went to school in Los Angeles, is that right?
Yes.
Occidental College, is that correct?
Yes.
It was 1990 that you graduated,
Yes.
and you had a Bachelor of Arts in Political Science, is that
Yes.
right? Not psychology, not business, but political science, right?
Yes.
Is that something that interested you at the time?
Yeah, at the time I wasn't sure if I wanted to go to law school or clinical psychology.
I would recommend not going to law school. So.
I don't know. You haven't been in my shoes.
During your undergraduate degree, now most people that have gone to college, the undergraduate is kind of not as focused as maybe grad school or doctorate level studies. Is that fair to say?
Yeah.
Did you study any of the Greek philosophers like Socrates, Plato, Aristotle, Alexander the Great? Did you study any of those?
Probably. I don't remember.
But not fair to say, not much.
Not much.
Political philosophers like John Marx, John Stuart Mills, Karl Marx,
Yes.
because that's more of the political science side.
Yes.
How about the existential philosophers like Nietzsche, Heidegger, Sartre?
I had a class on existentialism.
Okay, but
One
not much,
class.
right?
Yeah.
How about the religious philosophy? Francis Bacon, Immanuel Kant, Soren Kierkegaard.
I'm sure they were covered in some courses, but I mean, I didn't study them in depth. I'm no specialist.
Would it be an accurate statement to say that out of all the philosophy, it was not the religious philosophies you studied?
Yes,
No study in world religions really in undergraduate?
right,
No studies in comparative religions in undergraduate?
right.
No really study of theology or anything like that? No studies in the cults or occults?
No,
There's a term in theology when you look at world religions, when you look at different religions or makeups of different religions, it's called syncretism. Are you familiar with the term syncretism?
I have not.
Are you familiar with the word just to synchronize or to,
Yes,
and based on your knowledge and training and education, just your world experience, syncretism, that could be something where people take certain things from different religions and kind of amalgamate them or put them into a belief system.
I don't know.
And that's because you haven't really studied religion much in your career, right?
I'm not familiar with that word.
But how about in graduate school? Really same level, not really studying any of these philosophies or religion or anything like
That
that?
wasn't part of clinical psychology.
Same thing in your doctorate degree in 1999. During that time, you really focused on psychology or things like that.
Yes.
Did you get any specialty or certificates for psychology while you were at school, in graduate school, your doctorate degree?
Besides my degree?
Yes, ma'am. You can get certificates or specializations in psychology, right?
Oh, you can now. When I was in school in the 90s, like forensic psychology was only a postdoctoral specialty. Like there weren't even courses, let alone whole programs in it. It was something you had to study after your doctorate. So no, I didn't get any certificates. I don't remember any even being available.
But since you graduated, there have been certain things or specialties or certificates you could obtain in psychology. Is that fair?
Well, I mean, by then I had already graduated, so I didn't.
Let me repeat my question. Since you graduated, if you had chosen to, you could have got a specialty or certificate in psychology, correct?
I don't even understand what you mean by certificate. I mean, there are all kinds of certificates you can pay money to get, or take a continuing education class and get a certificate. So, I mean, I probably have gotten some of those from continuing education classes. I have no idea.
What is the ABPP?
Oh, okay. I think I get what you're talking about now.
I think
because
you do.
It's not a certificate. The American Board of Professional Psychology is an organization. They're probably a nonprofit. I don't know. And they grant, it's called a board certification. That's what it's called. So you can be board certified in forensic psychology, and it's not required. In fact, Dr. Garrett isn't. My husband is, but I'm not.
All right, here's my question.
Sorry.
That's okay. I'm trying to ask.
I am familiar with the ABPP. That was your question, right?
Yes, that was my question.
Yes, I'm familiar with them.
All right, the ABPP is a professional organization that actually you can go through and get either more training or recognition as a more specialist in forensic psychology, correct?
Correct.
In other words, isn't it true that if you have psychologists that deal with clinical or counseling, but if you really want to specialize, you can and have the ability to get more study and training to specifically focus on forensic psychology?
That I have done.
But you don't have a certificate from them or anything like that, correct?
Besides the board certification, they don't offer certificates for their courses.
Okay. Do you have the board certification?
No.
So you don't put your name, like after your initials, you put your PhD, but you do not put ABPP, correct?
Correct.
That's because if you get the ABPP certification, it's more of a title that you can show that you have either more training or maybe more experience, right?
It's kind of a feather in your cap. Yeah.
I mean, you're not downplaying. It is a significant thing you can do to actually.
Oh, yeah. Like when my husband got it, we totally celebrated. Yeah.
And forensic psychology, if you took the genus or if you took the overall category of psychology, just the big box up here, you got psychology, and then you've got some tracks where people are clinical psychologists and they do more of the counseling or the clinical side, right?
Yes.
And then you've got some that can go and do more of the forensic side where it's applied more so in courts. Is
Actually,
that
that's
correct?
not accurate. Only clinical psychologists can be forensic psychologists. So if you've got psychologists, and then some are clinical psychologists and some are experimental, and then under clinical psychologists, you can do forensic psychology, you can do therapy, you can do assessment. So all forensic psychologists are by definition clinical psychologists because you have to have a license in clinical psychology to practice forensic psychology. Forensic is a subspecialty.
All right. So you would agree that psychology or clinical psychology is different, whatever degree you call it, is different than forensic psychology.
Forensic psychology is a subset of clinical psychology. So they're different in that all forensic psychologists are clinical psychologists, but not all clinical psychologists are forensic psychologists.
And if somebody was not a forensic psychologist, they did not operate under understanding the laws of Georgia as applied to psychology, as applied to mental issues in criminal cases. That person that doesn't deal with that or have any experience with that, they are not the ones that usually do that. They're usually doing something like counseling or clinical, correct?
Right.
Doctor, going through, I've got your CV, looked at that, but when you go through that, I want to begin with talking about some of your professional background. In Georgia, the last place you worked at, what was the name of that, firm or entity?
Forensic Specialty Group.
And when you work there on your letterhead, that's actually for your report, it actually has about 4 people listed on the top of the letterhead. Is that right?
6.
Okay, now, in the
I don't know if
report
we
I
have
have,
that
how
yet.
many do you have at the top?
I've got 6 names.
Okay. Is Kevin Richards one?
Yes.
He has a PhD, is that right?
Yes.
And then after his initials, he is certified or recognized by the ABPP, correct?
Yes.
And then I think Christina Gleiser, a PhD, and also recognized by ABPP, is that right?
Yes.
And then you're on there, is that correct?
Yes.
And you have your PhD, is that right?
Yes.
And then this is a firm that did a lot of forensic psychology, is that correct?
That's all they do.
Okay. They're specialized in that, right?
Yes.
And they're so specialized that that's kind of really limited to their expertise, is that right?
No, in fact, Kevin Richards has done therapy and forensic psychology, and then he owns the practice, and then the other people, including me, are contractors, and because we're contractors and not employees, we're required to have other work, and so, one person's other work is doing therapy with adolescents, one person's other work is doing risk assessments. I mean, yeah, we do all kinds of things. But in forensic specialty group, we only do forensic psychology.
And if there was a box, and that box was forensic psychology, everybody in that firm is doing forensic psychology, right?
When they're doing a case assigned to them by FSG, yes.
Right. Now, at the firm, they would do things like types of evaluations, competency to stand trial, correct?
Yes.
Competency to waive rights under Miranda, right? Criminal responsibility or mental state at the time of offense, right?
Yes.
Transfer of juvenile defendants to or from adult court, right?
Yes.
Diminished capacity or diminished responsibility or mitigation, correct?
Yes.
Sentencing, including aggravation and mitigation in cases.
Yes.
Psychosexual evaluation or sexual violence risk assessments, right?
Yes.
Violence risk assessments, correct?
Yes.
Parenting, fitness capacity, and child protection cases, right?
Yes.
These are things not only that they do, but they advertise. These are the services that they can provide when it comes to evaluations. Is that right?
Correct.
Now, how many of you, for you when you worked there, how many of those type of things did you do for an attorney?
There were several things on the list you just read that I don't do.
Okay.
Sexual violence risk assessments I don't do. I can't remember. There are a few. I did most but not all of those things. And that's generally true for forensic psychologists. They're just not trained, or they don't want to do like every single thing.
Now, those things I just listed there, how many of those did you do? I'm going to talk about you. How many of those did you do? And those were for a criminal attorney and a civil attorney.
All of the things you listed were all criminal.
Okay.
And
So-
the things I did for civil attorneys weren't on that list.
Okay, so the things that I just list that are advertised, you agree with me that most of those are done for a criminal attorney.
Yes.
And how many of those were done for, say, a private attorney versus a public, like a government attorney? Out of the ones that you've done?
I don't, do you mean public defense versus private attorney, or?
Right, so private attorneys, out of all the things that you've done that we've talked about, that you've
Yeah.
done for criminal attorneys, how many of those that you've done were for private attorneys?
I don't know. We got a healthy mix of public defense offices sending us cases and private attorneys sending us. I don't know. I think it trended a little bit more towards the public defense office, but I honestly don't know.
And by public defense, you mean like a public defender or indigent defense, someone that's on the defense side, right?
Yes.
Okay. It would be that side of the courtroom, not the prosecutor side of the courtroom.
Right.
Now, how many of those that we talked about that you did, you've done for a prosecutor?
Well, like I talked about earlier, none, because the prosecutors don't call us because they use the DB, I'm sorry, the
The
behavioral.
department.
Yeah, they
of
use the
health.
department, yeah. So prosecutors just don't call the group practice, and that's how it was in Oregon too. Like prosecutors just, they use the state psychologist.
Do you understand in the state of Georgia that prosecutors actually can use private experts?
Yes, and I had forgotten that because I hadn't ever gotten any until my husband reminded me just the other day. And he said, oh, no, they can, but they tend to call the same couple people. It's never us. So we can't control who, who calls us.
On a whole, you agree with me that the majority of your evaluations that you've done as you worked at this firm would be for criminal defense attorneys.
Right.
All right, let's talk about the types of expert consultation that your firm did. They could do things like research and prepare briefs regarding psychological issues,
Yes.
assist with cross-examination of expert witnesses is on the website.
That wasn't ever anything that I did. That is more something that Dr. Richards and well, on here it says Dixon, but her name's different now, that they do in military courts.
And-
It's not something I've ever done.
And fair to say that your colleagues there at the firm that you work for, that those would be helping the defense prepare to cross-examine a government expert, right?
No, they get hired equally in the military on both sides.
Do you know the percentage of which would be for the defense and which would be for the government?
I don't, but since my husband does those, sorry, my husband is Dr. Richards, so just so I'm talking about the same person. I could flip a coin. I don't know. It's like defense or prosecution. I don't. It's both. It's all the time.
Sure, but
Yeah.
you agree your he's not an expert in this case or relevant to this case?
No, I'm just saying that the people at Forensic Specialty Group who do consulting on cross-examination work for the defense and the prosecution. I'll stop talking about that.
Now, most of the income that you made at that firm and the firm made, a lot of that significant portion of that would have come from defense attorneys, is that right?
Yes.
And as you've gone through your career, I noticed that in your CV that you worked in places like Portland, Oregon, is that right?
Yes.
And you did that and you would do things in mitigation of sentence, is that right?
Yes.
Yeah, actually on your CV you have mitigation of sentence, is that right?
Yes.
And that mitigation is to take a defendant that's being sentenced and trying to show mitigation or lesser reason they should be punished and should be punished less severe, correct?
Well, that's the attorney's goal. Yes.
I mean, that's what mitigation means, right?
Well, mitigating factors probably mean something a little bit different to me as a psychologist.
Fair to say you're not testifying on the side of the prosecution and mitigation, right?
In civil cases, I might have, but I don't remember.
Right. Prosecution's not a civil case, so we're in criminal, correct?
Oh, I mean plaintiff and defense, yeah. But for prosecution, no, they didn't hire me.
Let me talk to you about your professional training and presentations. In your CV, you listed some training. You did 2023 consultation testifying cases with child victims, is that right?
Yes.
And was that by any certain organization?
I don't know, if it's on my CV, it's probably the AAFP, which is run by the ABPP, which you were asking me about, yeah.
2019 ethics and multiple relationships, is that right?
If it's on my CV, then yeah, I don't.
2019 forensic evaluation and disability matters.
Like I said, I don't have my CV memorized, so if it's on there, then sure.
If I'm going off your CV, would you have any reason to doubt that I've
No,
misrepresented it?
no.
2019 recreational drug use in forensic settings, correct?
Okay,
2016 providing psychological consultations in homicides.
okay,
These are from yours. These are the ones that you put down.
okay.
Was that for a prosecution or defense in those?
Either. If it says consultation, what does it say again?
Providing psychological consultation in homicides?
Yeah, that would just be consulting about homicides. They don't teach it to either side.
2013, you did malingering forensic psychological evaluations. Familiar with that one?
If it's on my CV, again.
Now, in some of your presentations, you did a 2014 presentation in cross-examination of a psychological testimony. Did you teach that? Did you present that?
Oh, I gave a 1-hour talk on that.
Okay, was that to defense attorneys?
No, it was to civil attorneys.
Plaintiff's attorneys.
It was to plaintiff's attorneys.
And plaintiff's attorneys are people that sue people for money and things like that?
Yeah,
Are you familiar with oftentimes defense attorneys also are plaintiff's attorneys?
I don't know.
But in that, you gave a presentation on, I guess, how to handle cross-examinations,
Yes,
kind of, this is what to expect and this is what you should do, or how you should answer questions type thing?
yes, crafting questions that will make sense to us.
And then you've done other things, you've done other presentations, but my question when it comes to training presentations, is it fair to say that your audience have not been police officers or anything like that?
I'm trying to think if I gave any presentations to law enforcement. The reason why I'm having trouble remembering is because I did do some public safety stuff with a colleague of mine, but I don't think that I gave presentations.
Set that one aside if it's just one time.
It wasn't just one time, but it was like, I don't even know if it's how relative. I had a colleague in police and public safety, and
Here's my
okay.
question. Your training and teaching presentations that you do, they're not to things like the victims and the family of the victims, or victim advocates, or prosecutors, or police officers, or investigators, things like that. Is that fair to say?
I think so. I'm not positive, but I think so.
Now, sometimes I like on cross-examination with experts, I like to ask them, you got your phone with you today?
No.
You have your laptop or your phone, wherever it's at. If I were to ask you if you would have more contacts in your phone or your computer, your contact, would there be more defense-oriented contacts than, say, prosecutor contacts?
It's hard to say. I haven't had any forensic referrals in a couple of years. So right now, there aren't a whole lot of attorneys on my contact list.
I want to now turn to another topic, testifying as an expert. What are the total, I need specifics, what's the total number of times in your career that you've testified as an expert?
I don't know exactly. I know it's dozens.
What does dozens mean? Are you saying 24 or more than that?
No, more than that.
Okay.
Less than 100? I have not been keeping track. Yeah.
Doctor, I assume every time you testify for an expert, you got paid, is that right?
Yes.
So there has to be a log of something where you would keep a detailed record of how many times you have testified as an expert. Would that be fair?
Well, there'd be an invoice, but there's also invoices for evaluations and reports, so I
So
mean,
is it closer to 50 or closer to 100?
Give me a minute, because I'm gonna do some averages in my head. Closer to 100.
All right? And has there ever been a time when you have not been qualified, where a court has said you're not qualified as an expert?
No.
Tell me the number of times in the last 5 years that you've testified in court, not at a deposition, not at a hearing, but at a jury trial, that you've testified as an expert and a judge has certified you, deemed you an expert.
In the past 5 years?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, let me think. Maybe 8.
And how many of those were criminal?
All of them.
And where were those at?
Georgia. In different counties, I don't remember.
And how many of those were murder cases?
Not all of them, not even most of them. I don't know if any of them were. I don't remember.
And how many of those were during the guilt stage, not sentencing, but the actual guilt?
I don't recall.
How many times have you been deemed an expert in forensic, not psychology generally, not general psychology or testifying about counseling, but forensic psychology in the last 5 years?
All those times.
And all those times that you've been called, were you called by a defense attorney?
Yes.
Now I want to talk about your focus, that's your standard focus. I think you left practice in 2021 from here in Georgia, is that right?
I think that at the end of 2021 is when I stopped taking new referrals.
And towards the end of the year of 2021,
Yes.
after you did your evaluation, your meetings in this case?
Yes.
All right, now, since then, you've got on several websites, is it fair to say that you're now online therapy for creatives who are overwhelmed, anxious, and depressed? Is that your focus now?
Yeah, that's my therapy practice.
And your specialties, as you advertise or is talked about online, is it accurate to say that you work with creative professionals and artists who are burning themselves out, and that you're accepting, warm, and perceptive?
Those are words from my website.
Now, on your website, specifically ballardphd.com, there's, under the personal view tab, do you remember saying that many therapists thinks it's not okay to share their personal views, but that's just not me?
Yes.
And then you go on to say, you give your personal views, and one of the things you say is, I am a defender of social justice. Do you remember saying that?
Yes.
And then you also talked about, in that saying where you're giving your personal views, that your personal work recognizing my own privilege and working through, quote, my own latent biases is challenging, lifelong, and humbling.
That is something that, yes.
And so you agree that everyone has a bias in some way or degree.
We all do.
Now, you also say on that website, I believe, as a therapist, I pay attention to the impact of systemic injustice. Is that something you pay attention to?
As a therapist, yes.
Now, some of you advertise that some of your things that you expertise are things like burnout, grief, life transitions, mood disorders, relationship issues, self-esteem, trauma and post-traumatic stress issues, PTSD, women's issues, open relationships, non-monogamy. Those are some of your expertise that you advertise, right?
That isn't on my website. That sounds like something from a therapist directory.
Okay. Are those things that you do focus on?
Those are referrals I would take that I can work with, but it's not something that I would advertise on my website. Because that's a lot. Yeah.
Is it objective to say that one of your specialties now is not forensic psychology?
Well, in my therapy practice, it's not. That would be inappropriate.
And I think you testified on direct that you're no longer really doing forensic psychology, except I think you said here today.
From the cases I took through to 2021, once all those close out, I won't have any open forensic cases. I still am doing continuing education because I'm taking a break, but I'm not sure, when I'll want to start taking more evaluations on.
So I want to move to a different topic now. I want to talk about your knowledge or your worldview of what you understand, whatever concept term you want to give it, about the what you call the cult that the defendant was in. And I'm not going to battle you over whether it's a cult or not a cult.
Okay.
I'm not arguing over that. Whatever term you give the religious group that they're in, fair to say that when you look at that, do you know anything about 508c1a trust or anything like that?
No.
Do you know anything about 501c trust? Is a charitable trust, just general charity. If I told you that 508c is more of a religious trust, would you have any reason to disagree with me?
I have no idea.
And fair to say you didn't really go into that with the defendant and ask her about trust and things like that?
We didn't talk about that at all.
Didn't really go into details about her and the group trying to get a house through that or try to get money through that?
We didn't talk about that at all.
Did you talk about, she tell you about any schemes about or plans to get money to avoid IRS or to get a house or anything through a trust?
No. There was something about trying to get a house, but that was the extent of it.
Okay.
So,
Fair to say that under this 508c1a, you don't know that they can get a IRS employee identification number, EIN, excuse me?
like I said, I don't know anything about 508, whatever.
You don't know anything about this group's teachings or studies, right?
Only what I've heard from reading from this case, reading information and what Chloe said.
Don't know anything about their sermons or writings, correct?
Correct.
Nothing about their philosophy or theology, correct?
Again, only what I've learned from this case.
And did you learn in this case that when she was arrested in her bag, not only was there CBD, but there was a Bible?
I didn't know that.
Did you know they used a Bible?
It doesn't surprise me because a lot of the terminology around it is biblical.
But fair to say you don't know much about their culture, right?
Right.
May I have a question, please?
Yes.
Doctor, I'm handing you the DSM-5-TR. May I hand that to you?
Sure.
Go ahead and just look at that for a second. I'm going to ask you some questions on that, but first what I want to do is ask you about, this is, I don't know if you use the term, but some people use that, this is the Bible of psychology, or this is a learned treatise.
I've heard that term before.
Would you agree with me that the DSM-5 is a book that's relied upon by not just forensic psychologists, but clinical psychologists and people, psychiatrists all over the world?
Yes.
It is a learned treatise, right?
Yes.
It's a scholarly book or has lots of knowledge.
Yes.
All right. And the DSM-5, that's the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, right?
Yes.
And it took about 12 years to prepare the DSM-5, but then I think 2021 they came along and did text revision. Is that fair?
I don't remember the exact year, but yeah.
What version did you use when you were evaluating the defendant in this case?
Let me see if I said it in my report. It was either 5 or 5TR, I don't.
Right, and they're basically the same, the 5 and the TR, right?
That's why I can't remember,
Right.
because, yeah.
Well, you agree with me that this manual, as it states on page, you can turn to page 21 if you want, but the primary purpose is to assist trained clinicians. You know that, right?
Yes.
All right. Maybe it'd help if I just don't, I may turn you to a page in a second here or there, but let's do it this way. The primary purpose of the DSM-5 is to use for clinicians, is that correct?
Yes.
All right. If you turn to page 29 of that, I think it's around page 29, but the DSM-5, in your expertise, my expertise is in law. I can't keep up with you in psychology, so you're going to have to help me. But in your world, there is a cautionary aspect, or there's a cautionary aspect that when you use the DSM-5 for something similar to it, that you have to recognize that it's primarily designed to assist clinicians, right?
Yes.
What on page 29 does the DSM-5 actually have a cautionary statement for forensic use?
Yeah, that diagnoses can be misunderstood in forensic situations unless they're explained by a trained clinician. I'm not reading right out of this.
That's all right, but you agree with me that when you're using psychology or the DSM-5, you have to be careful that in a forensic setting, you have to look for the some risk and limitations of the DSM-5 or the psychological application, correct?
Yeah, that's why I'm here, so that terms aren't just thrown around and people don't know what they mean.
Because ultimately, when it comes to forensic psychology, that is dealing with psychology that you would have in the DSM-5. So if you have a book, and you have that book there, this is the Georgia Code. So I have another book. You have that book and I have the Georgia Code.
Sure.
If I asked you, you could not do it. If I asked you to look up in the DSM-5 the Georgia law of insanity, it's not in there, is it?
Right.
It's not in there because insanity and any defense for that, you agree with me, is a question that is controlled by this book, the code.
Insanity is a legal term. The word insanity isn't in here.
Right, you couldn't find it if I asked you to, correct?
Right.
Right, insanity is a question of law that this jury has to decide in this case, right?
Correct.
Not psychology, not the DSM-5. This law applies to the facts of this case that this jury gets to say, right?
Right.
All right, let me ask you about, when you look at some of these things, you talk about schizophrenia and you talk about personality disorders as your opinion of what the defendant holds. Is for academic discussion and for practical discussion, I'm not going to dispute that right now. But when it comes to the schizophrenia, it's kind of a spectrum, isn't it?
By spectrum, I mean, people have it in different degrees. Like, someone could have schizophrenia with only mild symptoms, and some people have really severe symptoms that are really resistant to treatment. So if that's what you mean by spectrum, then yes.
And under the DSM-5, the book that you have in front of you, there are other mental disorders in this book, correct?
Yes.
There's lots of them, right?
Yes.
I mean, there's things like mental disorders that you have in the book. You have anxiety disorder, fear of injections or shots, correct?
Yes.
You have hoarding as a mental disorder, correct?
Okay. Is it?
You can turn to page 273 and see what's there.
I haven't had any hoarders in a while.
It's 273.
I don't see it on body dysmorphic disorders on 273.
You don't see it there on 273?
273 is about body dysmorphic disorder.
Okay,
But anyway, I mean,
if we go back, I'll find it in a second here. Post-traumatic stress disorder?
that's in here, yeah.
Okay. Binge eating disorders?
Yes,
Insomnia disorders?
I believe so.
Sleep apnea?
Is that in the DSM?
See if I got this page right. Look at
memorized,
page 429.
Oh, sleep apnea, yeah.
How about 464, restless leg syndrome?
Yes.
All right, just these others. Alcohol intoxication, you agree with me that these are also caffeine-related disorders, cannabis use disorders, tobacco use disorders. These are all types of mental disorders under DSM-5.
Yes.
Then there's other things or condition or problems that you have to focus on. And part of that is religious or spiritual problems. Is that correct?
I believe so, but
Turn to page
like I said,
834.
I don't have this memorized.
834.
834. Oh, yeah, okay.
And you agree with me that when you're doing the DSM-5 or trying to apply a psychological opinion, that the manual says that when it comes to questioning of spiritual values that may not necessarily be related to an organized church or religious institution, you have to take that in consideration, that it could be a religious group that's outside of mainstream, right?
Right.
And it's important to know that when you're giving a psychological opinion. You agree with that, wouldn't you?
Yes.
And you don't know anything about their religious teachings or spiritualism, do you?
I know, like I said, I know what I've learned in this case from what all the records and information say and what she told me.
The DSM and what you're supposed to do when you do an evaluation, especially if somebody's not mainstream, there's something called the Cultural Formation Interview, CFI, correct?
Yes.
And that's something you can take into consideration, their religion, spirituality, and when you look at the group or the individual, they use these things to fashion their own identities and sense of experience, right?
Are you reading to me from a certain page?
I'm asking you, as a psychologist, you would have to consider those things, correct?
In a therapy relationship?
In using the DSM-5.
In diagnosing someone that I was seeing for therapy, yes.
You agree with me that context and things matter when you're looking at a person's and their, whether or not they're telling you something that's true or not true.
Yes.
And part of that is you have to consider the words that they use.
Yes.
And that word may be, like if somebody could say insane, and they may mean that term to be I'm insane, but not in a legal sense or psychological sense. It could just be an idiom they use, right?
Yeah, it's used in daily language often.
And the particulars of what a word is used by someone, including the defendant, you have to figure out, are they meaning I'm crazy or delusion in the same sense that you would mean as a psychologist, correct?
Right.
But the DSM-5, it recognizes this and it talks about cultural idioms, right?
It does.
And if you look at page 874 for me, because when you're evaluating someone's psychosis, you have to consider the words and the things that they're using. And some cultures have different ways of saying things. Are you familiar with the term ataque de nervos?
Attack of nerves.
Right.
That's what it means.
How about on page 876, there's the maladie de Yab. It's literally the devil or Satan illness found in Haitian cultures.
Right.
So there's things like voodoo, witch doctors, things like that. Even happen here in the United States, right?
Yes.
And so how they view the world may be strange or weird or delusional in some ways to the average person, but if they believe it, that could be a genuine belief that they hold, correct?
Right.
And you need to understand that the culture in order to give a diagnosis, right?
It's one important part of giving a diagnosis, yes.
Right. If you look on page 124 of the DSM-5, there it talks about the cultural and socioeconomic factors that must be considered. You see that?
Mm-hmm.
And there, do you see where it says that cultural and socioeconomic factors must be considered, particularly when the individual and the clinician do not share the same cultural and economic background, right?
Right.
And the idea there is that you need to mitigate the impact of a clinician's bias, right?
Right.
So I want to turn now to something that you didn't talk about with the defense. If you turn to page 835 of the Bible, if you would, of the DSM.
835.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
This is discussing malingering, correct?
Oh, here, yes.
You agree with me that when you're in a context of a clinical setting, a person can come in and be the historian for their facts and what happened to them. That happens often, right?
Yes.
And when you're in a forensic setting, oftentimes that when that person comes in to give you a history, they are self-admitting or they are the historian themselves, correct?
Well, the history from the defendant is one piece of information to be compared against a lot of other pieces of information. So yeah, we get our history from that person.
And in your practice, in your field of expertise, and specifically in the DSM-5, you are to strongly consider if somebody is malingering, right?
That's a foundation of forensic psychology, is that there's no forensic evaluation that doesn't take into consideration whether someone might have been malingering. There's even a paragraph in my report about why I thought that Ms. Driver wasn't malingering.
And malingering, like saying a ideation is a fancy way to say idea. Malingering is a technical term that means they are faking or lying or exaggerating, correct?
Right, to get some desired outcome, yeah.
You see number 1 under the malingering section there is number medico-legal.
Yeah,
Read that paragraph out loud to something you should consider when it comes to malingering.
medico-legal context of presentation, e.g. the individual is referred by an attorney to the clinician for examination, or the individual self-refers while litigation or criminal charges are pending.
So off the get-go, if a person is referred to you by an attorney, you should consider that, correct?
Absolutely.
If the person is sitting with charges, you should consider that, correct?
Yes, this is basic, like forensic psychology.
And if the
101.
person is being evaluated in a criminal setting, you should consider that too, right?
All of those.
Because there is a motive, whether you find it to be true or not. Technically speaking, structurally speaking, you would have to agree with me, would you not, that there is a motive to lie or to malinger?
A motive to what? To malign?
To lie or
Oh,
malinger.
yes, yes.
Now, one thing you didn't discuss with the defense, and I'm in your report, I think it's around page 12, you did some psychological testing. You actually used a diagnostic or to the best of its ability, objective thing to see if the defendant was malingering or there were issues with her self-reporting or her assessments, right?
Yes.
All right, let's talk about this because the defense didn't ask you about this. But in your report, you used something to test her evaluation or her answers by using something called the MMPI-2-RF, right?
Yes.
And that is the Minnesota Multiphasic Personality Inventory 2 restructure form, right?
Right.
That is a 338 true-false test or inventory that is, in this case, the defendant could take to answer certain questions, right?
Right.
Because her evaluation or that thing itself is a self-reporting instrument or self-reporting procedure in many ways, correct?
Right, because she fills it out, true or false.
And you did this to see if it had any correspondence to the validity of her scores or her testing, right?
I did what?
You gave her this test to see if she was malingering or if there was any issues with the validity of her test, right?
Of her test?
Of her evaluation.
Oh, her evaluation. I mean, that wasn't the only reason. The MMPI is, it measures like psychopathology, like symptoms, because it asks a lot about symptoms, but it also measures kind of more stable personality traits. So the only reason to give it it's not a malingering test. There are specific malingering tests you can give. This isn't.
And you didn't use those tests, right? Malingering tests.
Right.
You chose not to use the malingering.
In this case, her self-report was so consistent with all the other sources of information that I did not use a malingering test.
But she has some over-endorsement of symptoms, right?
Yes.
In fact, you said Ms. Driver produced an invalid MMPI-2-RF profile due to over-endorsement of symptoms, right?
Yes.
And you agree with me that under the MMPI, the manual and the testing itself, that there is a F-R, which is infrequent responses measure, and then you put PF-R, but I think that's actually FP-R, right?
Oh, probably.
And I do typos all the time, but
Yeah.
there's two categories. There's F-R and PF-R, right?
Yes.
And you gave a score of 120 for the F-R and a 99 for the PF-R, right?
I didn't give it. That's a score sheet earned.
Right.
Yeah.
And you agree with me that the MMPI has a kind of a scale that if there is a scale for the FR that's 79 to 99, that there's a possible motivated response.
Possibly, but you'd never interpret test results without looking at all the other information about the case. So yeah, possibly.
And under the MMPI, if there is a score that's above 100 for the F-R, that it's not possible of motivated response or helping out is actually, it is a motivated response, right?
Say that again, sorry.
All right. Under the MMPI, whether or not someone's helping themselves out or motivating in their answers or giving these type of answers, to test the validity, there's a range. 77 to 99, if it's in that range, it's possible that they gave a motivated response, right?
Okay.
Then there's another range, if it's 100 or above, in this case, hers is 120, that it is motivated.
I'm interested in your source for that.
Judgment approach?
Yes.
But where is that from? Like what textbook
manual or some
or
type of-
research article or book?
Yeah, something like that. Well, would you disagree with me that there is a scale?
Well, what I'm stuck on is that the MMPI.
Well, doctor, let me do it this way.
This is someone's take on it, but the MMP. The reason why I'm stuck is because the MMPI doesn't tend to talk in terms of definite. So when you say something's definitely the case, that's not usually how we interpret MMPIs.
Let me put it this way. You agree with me that her scores are high
Yes.
and that they are above normal or abnormal, right?
Yes.
So you agree with me that maybe not you, but another psychologist could look at her scores and say, yeah, she was trying too hard, right?
Although they might have, it would be inconsistent with all the other sources of information. So they might decide that in all those other places she was really not trying hard. She was presenting as herself, but in this place she decided to, exaggerate or something. So
the answer to my question is yes, someone could disagree with you.
someone could, yeah, sure.
Judgment approach.
Yes.
Am I gonna give
Here.
my notes back?
No, here.
And the same thing was true with her. You put PF-R, but FP-R.
Yeah.
So there were two, you agree with me that there were two things on some diagnostic where she was scoring abnormally high, right?
She scored invalid. Yeah.
All right, let me,
I can explain what that means unless, well, never mind, sorry.
nope. By all means, if you want to explain, go ahead.
The MMPI has validity scales and then it has clinical scales. And you don't look at the clinical scales like the depression scale or whatever unless you make sure that the validity scales are okay. In other words, they took the test without trying to fake good or fake bad or anything. So I didn't interpret any of her clinical scales because her validity scales were all that she over-reported symptoms. And so one possibility for that is if somebody isn't a great reader and they misunderstand items, that they could end up reporting things. And I felt like that probably didn't explain it for her because she reads, you only need to read like an elementary school level for this test. Another possibility is that she was faking and like trying to report a whole bunch of symptoms like in a lying kind of way. And that's possible, like I just said, but she wasn't in every other like interview with me, with other people, in all the other information from police, from witnesses, there wasn't that lying present. So the third possibility for that invalid score is that she is continuing to experience psychotic symptoms and just, it's called a cry for help, is the third option for being invalid, is that you're in distress and you're just endorsing everything because it's like you're in distress, you want help, so you're just like, yeah, like to everything. And so it's not faking bad, like, oh, I want to look really sick because I want, some particular end. It's a cry for help by dramatically endorsing things. And I think she took it that way, and so I didn't want to interpret the clinical scales because it wasn't really an accurate representation. There you go.
Right, that was your opinion on why it was
That's my
invalid.
professional opinion.
And doctor, you agree with me in that second option the one that says intentionally attempting to present themselves as mentally ill is in order to obtain a secondary gain, right?
That's the whole definition of malingering.
So you'd have to concede that in the context of her doing this mental evaluation, she's been arrested for murder, and the secondary gain is not to be found guilty of killing, stabbing to death her own 13-month-old child, right? You'd have to concede that.
I'd have to agree. What am I agreeing to?
You have to concede that. That's one of the options, right?
Oh, it is one of the
Right.
options.
You just didn't think it was that one.
Nor did Dr. Garrett or Dr. Zom or anyone else. Yeah.
Thank you for that, Doctor. But in the end, when you actually interviewed her, you met with her on, I believe, March 29th, 2021 and June 12th, 2021, right?
Yes.
And you didn't write in your report how long you met with her for those visits. Is that correct?
I didn't put it in the report. It's somewhere in the invoice or something.
And who was present during this interview with you and her? Just the
Just
two?
the two of us.
You had the ability to video record it, correct?
I don't think so.
You have the ability to audio record it?
I didn't ask. I've never audio recorded my forensic evaluations.
If you had, we could have heard exactly what she said and how she said it and things like that, right?
Well, although, yeah, that I don't know anyone who auto records their forensic evaluations. That's not, you know.
Are you familiar with I think it was the trial in Colorado for the theater shooting? I believe they had about 22 hours or so. Familiar with that trial?
I'm not.
You familiar with Dr. Gurr?
It was-
Dr. Gurr?
Can you spell it?
I think it's Ghar maybe?
I'm not.
Well, going back to yours, when you interviewed her, did you know who she talked to before her interview? Do you know if she talked to her mom?
I mean, I know she had talked to her mom.
Do you know if she talked to her dad?
I know she had talked to her dad before I met her.
Do you know if she had talked to Benjamin?
I know she had talked to Benjamin at some point before I met her.
Do you know if she talked to any of her friends?
If she had friends, I assume she talked to them at some point before I met her. I mean, do you mean like in her whole life?
Before
that
the
day?
interview, from the time she was arrested in jail before
Oh,
the
in
interview.
jail. I knew she had talked to her parents. I don't think she told me she talked to friends. And I believe I knew that she had talked.
Doctor, I apologize. That was a terrible question. From the
Mr.
time she was arrested to the
Yeah.
time she was given the interview, before you walked in to do the interview, you didn't really know who she had talked to or what they talked about, right?
I don't remember if I knew or not.
And you don't know what all jail calls she's had or anything to discuss it, correct?
I don't think I knew when I first met her.
Do you know whether or not she had talked to her lawyers before she talked with you?
I know she had talked to her attorneys before she met with me.
Are you familiar with what's called a jailhouse lawyer?
Yes,
Do you know whether or not she talked to anybody else that gave her any legal advice or things to say or not say?
I do not know.
You agree with me, though, that she had the ability to communicate with other people.
Yes,
She had the ability to sit around and talk about her case.
yes,
And she was around people that could have been sympathetic to her position and where she was in that reality, right?
yes.
And you don't know any letters she may have received or text messages or things in jail where they can actually communicate electronically. You don't know anything about that?
No,
And she saw you at the request of her attorney, right?
yes,
And she was charged with murder at that time, correct?
yes,
All right. Some of the things that the sources of information that you got was from her mother, that you talked to her, correct?
yes. I spoke with her mother on the phone.
And then also Angela Trethewey, her attorney, right?
Yes,
And did you meet with Angela Trethewey several times during this course of the evaluation, in your opinion?
no,
And when you talked to her, you went through and she told you when it came to family history that she was raised in an intact family, correct?
yes.
She had a normal pregnancy when she was born, right?
Let's see.
It's on page 2 and 3 of your report.
Thanks. I mean, if that's what it says in my report.
Normal childhood, correct?
Yes,
She was known as being headstrong, right?
yes,
Quote, hard to handle, correct?
yes,
Lots of arguing in the family.
yes.
She had no learning difficulties, correct?
That's what she and her mom told me.
She had no special education needs, right?
That's what she and her mom
She
told me.
didn't repeat any grades.
That's what she and her mom told me.
Mom says that she was smart.
Yeah,
And the trouble she had in middle and high school, that was actually a defiance issue, not a mental issue.
well, it was both.
Did you use the word defiance?
Yes, defiant behavior.
I'm just going off what your report says.
Okay.
So you agree with me it was
Yeah.
a defiance issue,
I'm
right?
talking about her defiance there, and a couple paragraphs later, I'm talking about her mental issues. So they both were happening at the same time, just not in the report at the same time.
Not related to any academic difficulties, correct?
They didn't report any academic difficulties for her.
You remember on direct, you testified that her parents let her when she was about 15 go and live with a boyfriend, right?
Yeah,
But you agree with me that she was defiant there and had to come back, right?
that's what they told me.
She refused to attend school when she came back.
Yes.
She dropped out before her 18th birthday.
Well, she dropped out and joined Mr. Joyce. So, yeah.
Talked about the substance abuse history that she had. You've already described that. You agree that there was no history of mental health treatment before this event.
Right.
She cut her wrist, but you noted it was superficial, right?
Yeah, typical of borderline personality disorder.
And she diagnosed that there was a suicide attempt in 8th grade taking a bottle of sleeping pills. Is that right?
Yes.
So the only other suicidal act that you have here for her prior to December 8th of 2020 was herself reporting that it was sleeping pills in 8th grade.
Yes.
You don't know what they were, where they came from, or no one else corroborated that, correct?
I don't believe she told anyone else.
So that'd be correct. No one else corroborated.
Right.
And then you noted that there were periods of paranoia, and most of those, you agree with me, were not when Benjamin was around, but it would have been during the time that she was using drugs.
Yeah, she said that she started to have paranoia, and sometimes it was when she was using marijuana, and sometimes it wasn't. And it started years before she met Mr. Joyce, or Mr. Benjamin, sorry.
And then when it came to relationship history, when she initially met with Benjamin and Michael, they were discussing spirituality that night.
Yes.
And then she reached out to him a few months later. She reached out, right?
Yes.
In fact, she lied to her parents and left and went to, I think, Myrtle Beach, South Carolina.
I don't know where it was, but she left to join him.
And she lied to her parents about where she was, correct?
Yes.
And in the beginning, you agree with me that she was, quote, all for having multiple women?
Well, she told me that she was all for it because he explained it in a way that made it make sense. Yes.
And that on page 5 of your report, if you look at the second paragraph, do you see where you wrote down when she explained that she was all for it, but she says, but she also reported that the reality of it was toxic and stressful. It was hard to get along.
Yes, I would expect that of any group of 4 adults living a nomadic lifestyle.
But
So,
my
yeah.
question is, did she say, not whether or not you expected, did she say that?
She did.
That's what she described, how she described the environment, correct?
She said it was hard for them all to get along.
She reported frequent arguments, right?
Yes.
She reported that when the third woman joined them, it added to the conflict, correct?
Yes.
And then she reported at some point she returned back to Benjamin, right?
When did she leave him? What?
Do you know of a time that she did leave him?
Yeah.
Look on page 5, third paragraph of your report. Do you remember saying that she returned to him
I see what you're talking about.
and they continued their nomadic lifestyle?
She wasn't allowed, at one point she was allowed to visit her mom, and then she went back to him.
And then, I think it's on page 6, the last paragraph. Do you remember the defendant telling you that when describing the relationship and the group that they're in, she says, you write that she became more frustrated in the relationship. And she reported that she began to take CBD to calm down.
Yes.
Right? But you described it as she became more frustrated in the relationship. And that's when she was taking CBD, correct?
Well, when I say that she became more frustrated in the relationship, it's referring to that above paragraph where the things she was getting frustrated about in the relationship was being controlled all the time, not being allowed to go to the grocery store to get stuff for her daughter, not being able to pick out her own baby food, And so the frustration in the relationship was around the control and the isolation that the relationship was requiring of her. So that it's referring to that. That's why I started it with the word as. So, but did I do it again?
It's okay.
Sorry.
Doctor, you're giving a lot of comments, and that's fine. I want all this again from the jury. On the same note, turn to page 7, fourth paragraph. You talk about these phone calls with Binyam and some of the things and using the urine. But you agree that, like in the phone call and the urine, I mean, that's weird. We get it, urine and all that. But you agree that in that, you don't understand their culture, that maybe for them, and actually in that phone call, he was telling her because you may get sick if you don't do it, correct?
Although that is part of it, the drinking the urine part isn't what concerned me. I mean, you're right, okay, it's weird, whatever, but that's not what concerned me. What concerned me is even if he'd been telling her to drink more water or something, was the way he was telling her, that he was ordering her, he was upset if she resisted at all, and he didn't move on until she broke down and said, I do, Daddy, I do. So that was the part that bothered me, was the control.
I wasn't asking about the part that bothered you. My question was, you agree that in the context of the urine, he was saying things as if she didn't do it, it could be bad for her health. Would you agree with that?
No, not really. He was saying you need to clear your head, and if they don't want you to, if they think you're weird, just tell them that your naturopath told you have to, or you'll get sick. But he wasn't saying that was true. He was saying, here's the lie to tell them if they think it's weird.
And when it comes to the calling someone daddy, you have no idea, do you? If you do, let me know whether or not she even recently has said to anybody like Roger Giddens or somebody that she would refer to them or someone as daddy in a relationship context.
Sorry, I understand that question.
You don't know whether or not the defendant has referred to other people in a relationship like boyfriend, girlfriend, and called them daddy, correct?
Called them what?
Daddy.
Oh, daddy. I don't know.
And you don't know what she said recently or anything like that, do you, when it comes to daddy and other people, right?
I don't.
And about all these phone calls that we talked about, these were in February of 2021, the ones that you listened to up around that time. Did you know that since that time to February of 2023, there was about 617 calls with the defendant, between the defendant and Benyamin?
I found that out recently.
That's because she didn't tell you about talking to him, did she?
Well, remember, I haven't talked to her since, June of 2021, so.
Pretty accurate to describe that she had a much more robust conversations and her reaching out to him than you knew about, right?
Well, again, anything that happened after June 12th, 2021, I wouldn't have known about, because that's the last time I talked to her.
Turn to page 7, fourth paragraph. In the context you're talking about the phone calls, I believe, she stated to you, we had a lot of good times. You see that? It's the next to last sentence in that fourth paragraph.
Yes.
We had a lot of good times when it was just us and our baby. You see that?
Yes.
And then she said, we were a normal family for a few moments. It's something I'm really struggling with, right?
Yes.
And then later on, I believe you reported that you talked about on direct that she was crying and have episodes. Is that right?
Probably, when?
When she was in the jail, you met with her. You know that she was crying, she was upset.
During my evaluation. Yes.
Then on page 8 of your report, you talk about she reported frequent and lengthy crying episodes before I think she got on some mess, and it says, and feelings of, what was the word you used?
Let me find it. Where are we on page 8?
Page 8.
Yeah, where?
Last paragraph. You
Okay.
go about to the middle.
Okay.
You see in the middle there, it says she described her mood.
Yeah.
All right. She described her mood as better recently since initiating medication.
Yes.
She reported frequent and lengthy crying episodes, sadness, and feelings of guilt prior to her Prozac, right?
Yes.
But before that, and feelings of guilt.
Yes.
You noted the word guilt, right?
Yes.
You also know that she was still talking about religious preoccupation.
Yes.
and that she was attentive and concentrated to, her attention and concentration was intact. She was oriented to person, place, and time, and she knew the correct date, and she even knew the correct president, correct?
Yes.
And then when you went on to things about interviewing about the 8, she would say things like, was she not, I felt like the other women were plotting against me. This is on page 9, second paragraph.
Okay, yes.
She said, I felt like other women were plotting against me, like they were on wavelength that I just wasn't on. They were all on it. They were mean to me and mad at me, and it played in my paranoia even more, right?
Yes.
And then when you get into the specific actions and conduct that she did on December 8th, 2020, she talked about the reason she needed to kill her daughter herself. She said, quote, to pay for the sins I had committed. Page 11 of your report.
Yes.
To pay for the sins I had committed. That's what she said, right?
Well, I mean, that was one of the things I said, and
Sure.
I quoted it in the report. It wasn't the only thing she said.
She was in the room. She described being in the room, correct?
Yes.
She said that she, quote, found a knife, right?
I mean, that might have been the word that I used. I don't think it's in quotes.
So it may not be her word. It may be your interpretation.
Yeah.
That she brought it back to the room,
That she had brought that she had brought a knife back to the room.
and then that she stabbed herself and her daughter and then locked the door.
That's what she told me.
And have you read Dr. Zom's report?
Yes.
And it's a little different what she told Dr. Zom, correct?
There's more detail in Zom's report, and
Right. In Dr. Zom, she said, I walked down the stairs, correct?
I don't have her report in front of me.
Okay.
So
And we'll ask Dr. Zom when she's here. Judgment approach?
Yes.
I'm getting towards the end, Doctor, so just
yeah.
finish up with some things here. Here's some state's exhibits. You agree with me that when the defendant was in the hospital after she stabbed her baby to death and stabbed herself, that she was able to give statements actually in writing, correct?
Yeah, she couldn't talk because she had.
And you have in your
Throat.
hands state's exhibits 103, 104, 105, 106, 107, those exhibits there.
Yes.
All right. Those, just to be sure we're on the same page, those are exhibits where she wrote out, being in the hospital, her answers, right?
Yes.
It's her penmanship, her spelling, her dictation, it's her writing, correct?
Yes.
You agree with me that in the handouts that you had there, I think it's probably 104 and 106 maybe, that there were 2 Miranda waivers where she waived her Miranda rights, right?
Yes, she did.
She was able to give her Social Security information, correct?
Yes.
She was able to give her date of birth, right?
Yes.
She was able to give other information that she was tracking and had that in her head, correct?
Yeah, being disorganized wasn't part of her thought disorder. It was being delusional that was part of her thought. So she could give all this information, yes.
Doctor, thank you for your commentary, but that was not my question. My question is, she gave that information from her head, correct?
Yes.
Okay, you're giving commentary. They can do that on redirect.
Oh, sorry.
Doctor, in those statements, like for example, State's Exhibit 103, you remember that when she was asked, when the detective thought maybe Ben Michael did this, she said, and she wrote it down, he did not do it, I did it, right?
Right.
I was going insane, is what she said, and no longer wanted to be with his friends, but kept coming back for him. I only wanted my baby and husband, but he refused. She wrote that, right?
Yes.
And then she also writes, how long will my prison sentence be for killing her, correct? It states 105.
Yes.
It states 107, she says no. When asked about talking about the knife, she said, no, I went and got a knife.
Yes.
And she apologized. She felt bad about killing her, correct?
Absolutely.
Now, specifically, when asked if she thought her behavior was wrong, she stated, I'm asking your opinion. I have to be very careful in this, in the sense of the rules of evidence. I'm asking you what she said when you asked her if she thought her behavior was wrong. She stated, 1, yeah, as soon as it happened, I regretted it, correct?
That's what she told me.
2, I thought I shouldn't have done this, right?
After she did it, she thought she shouldn't have done it.
And 3, this was not supposed to happen.
Right.
Doctor, in considering your evaluation of the defendant, including her words and conduct, she described to you in connection with the act of her killing her own child. Is it accurate that the defendant was about 20 years of age?
Yes.
That the victim was 13 months old?
Yes.
That the defendant was the mother?
Yes.
The victim was the child?
Yes.
At some point, the defendant was armed with a knife.
Yes.
The victim was helpless.
Yes.
The defendant never said in any shape or form that the victim threatened her to do harm to her,
Right.
correct? Whether it was right then or in the future, right? The defendant never said the victim, demonic or otherwise, attacked me and I had to defend myself, correct?
Right.
Whether immediately or in the future. She never said that, did she?
About
The
Hannah?
need to her own daughter
Yeah,
attacking her.
right.
And you will agree with me, would you not, that the defendant, this defendant right here, this is the defendant sitting here, correct?
Yeah. Yes.
She never said she was in danger of harm, death, or peril from her own child, correct?
Right. It was by her own hand that she was in danger.
Now, doctor, the 2 books we talked about, the Judgment Approach.
Yes.
Yeah, the DSM-5.
Oh, yeah. Do you want these?
No, man, that's fine. I'll go ahead and get those. There's actually 3 books I thought about, but changed my mind. We've referenced the Bible, so a religious book, if you would. A psychological book. This is your expertise in psychology here, right?
Yes.
The Rule of Law, or the book of Georgia law. You agree that in this case, you're adding an opinion to one part, mainly the psychological part, correct? For the jury to understand and take in context the law, correct?
Mainly the psychological part. That's what forensic psychology does. Yes.
Each, in a way, can help the jury decide the ultimate issue in this case. Would you agree with that?
Yes.
And under Georgia law, part of it is that a person is presumed sane. You understand that, right?
Yes.
And that you also understand that under Georgia law that there is no defense of coercion or duress for murder, right?
Actually, sort of, but that's getting into the territory of like, I'm not a lawyer, so.
And that's what I want to get into. But ultimately, solely, at the end of the day, the decision that has to be made in this case, whether or not the defendant, as a matter of law, committed murder by stabbing her child 4 times, is a question of law under all the facts and circumstances that this jury has to make, not you, right?
Oh yeah, it's the jury's job.
That's all I have, Your Honor.